TikTok looks like later this week, on the 19th, in fact, it will be banned here in the United States. And I think many of us have negative or at least mixed feelings about the entire scenario. But for at least how long we've been discussing the TikTok ban, if not longer, there has been another ban that has been on the cusp of becoming a reality. A ban that would have a significant impact on the automotive industry, and it's actually set to be set in stone later on this week. A ban that no one really talks about, especially not in the mainstream media, and that is the ban on Chinese automakers here in the United States. And while I have discussed this topic here on my channel before, it is absolutely time for me to do a bit of a deeper dive. Historically, the term Chinese automakers, it wasn't really a phrase that was widely used in the automotive industry. While countries like Italy, Germany, Japan, they've had strongholds in the automotive industry for many decades now, China hasn't. And that has a lot to do with the fact that China had a much later start to manufacturing cars than any of the other countries that I just mentioned. In fact, China didn't start seriously manufacturing cars until the 1980s, and it wasn't until the 2010s that production reached substantial numbers. And today, Chinese automakers have gained such steam that China, the second most populous country in the world, has fully embraced vehicles made on their own soil, and as a result, American automakers that once dominated in China are now floundering in the market, creating a major issue for automakers that once relied on the Chinese market to thrive. But we aren't here today to talk about the downfall of American automakers in China. In fact, we're going to be discussing quite the opposite. And instead, we're going to be talking about the stifling of Chinese automakers here in America. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the banning of Chinese automakers here in the United States, I must make an important distinction. There are many cars that are not sold here in the United States that are sold in other parts of the world. Nissan Skyline, Toyota Hilux, the new Land Cruiser 70 series. These are three notable ones that I find interesting, but there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of vehicles that are not sold in the United States that even thrive in overseas markets. And the reason why some automakers don't sell their entire lineup or portions of it here in the United States, it can come down to a variety of legitimate reasons, including emissions, regulations, just market demographic. Maybe there's a car that does really well overseas, but for whatever reason, it wouldn't do well here. The distinction I'm trying to make here is that just because a car isn't sold here in the US doesn't mean it was banned either. But this is not the case with the Chinese automakers that we're about to talk about. As things currently stand, China has quite a lot of growing automakers, with the largest being BYD, which I've made a video about in the past, followed by another very popular brand called Chery, as well as a slew of other ones. And when it comes to Chinese automakers here in the United States, the discussion really didn't become a serious one, and Chinese automakers weren't a serious threat until relatively recently. And while we will dive into these threats here in a moment, there is also a valid question to be asked, and that is why now? Why now in 2024 and 2025 are Chinese automakers finally beginning to raise red flags for US automakers and the US government? And to be honest, I think there are a few different reasons. One reason is that there has been a major shift in the car market over the last 5 years, and a major part of that shift has been EVs. Now, I know that there is a major talking point that's been circulating around the news for really the better part of the last year, and that is that EVs are dying, but that is just statistically untrue. While EVs have had a no doubt rockier than expected time, and EV adoption may be slower than what many automakers had hoped, EVs are without a shadow of a doubt growing, and over the last 5 years, EVs have exploded. And while the US has proven to be a strong, powerful force in the world of gas vehicles, this is not the case with electric vehicles, and the verdict is still out on which country is going to dominate the EV market, bringing China into the running of trying to spearhead that effort. Another major factor is car prices, which have also exploded in the last 5 years, making cars extremely expensive and downright unaffordable. Now, I'm not here to make this video today to make the argument that Chinese electric vehicles are better than American-made ones, because to be honest, there are pros and cons to both. But there is absolutely no denying the fact that Chinese automakers and Chinese electric vehicles are at the very least competitive with American ones. I mean, look no further than the BYD Yon Plus. This is a competitor to the Model 3, has great range, and starts at under $17,000. The BYD Seal, which could be considered a Model S competitor and has a price range from about $43,000 to the low $60,000 depending on the trim. Chinese automakers offer something that American automakers just don't, and that is affordability. China's EVs are much cheaper than American-made ones, and the quality is extremely good for the price. In fact, one of China's best-selling cars is the BYD Seagull, which starts at just around 10 grand. Now, reliability of Chinese automakers is still questionable at best. In fact, JD Power reports that Chinese automakers have 190 problems per 100 vehicles. But I also think that the argument could still be made that the verdict is out on the reliability on American-made EVs as well, with Tesla and Rivian both performing equally as bad, if not worse, on JD Power ratings as well. And so the point is, Chinese automakers are building a product that at the very least can compete with American ones in the realm of EVs, offering what I think is an incredibly good-looking car with competitive range and an amazing price point. And yet, these cars are banned. So why? Now, if you were to ask the government on why they're banning these Chinese automakers, they would say that they're a threat to national security. They would say something to the effect that the Chinese tech, the same tech surrounding the whole TikTok ban discussion, can be used to snoop on American citizens and the United States as a whole. And while I'm certainly not a national security expert, and maybe national security does in fact have something to do with this ban, but let's be real, I don't think any of us think that this is the sole reason why America is banning Chinese automakers. And the hard truth is, this is all about protecting American automakers, and it's simply anti-competition. You know, the United States talks about how we're all about capitalism, free market, competition. But the reality is, for many decades now, this has really only been the case for American companies. And the American government in general isn't super quick to adopt foreign-made products, especially if they're threatening to the American-made alternative ones, even if that product is better, higher quality, and more affordable. We saw this back in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan ran on the promise of stifling Japanese automakers here in America. A promise that obviously long-term didn't work, because those same three automakers were Honda, Toyota, and Nissan, and two of those three are still huge forces today. But you know what the result of Chinese automakers gaining market share here in America meant? It meant that the American automakers, the big three at the time being Ford, GM, and Chrysler, it forced these automakers to step up their game, resulting in just all-around better products, even if it meant that these automakers had to give up market share and compete with overseas companies. When it comes to EVs, China, and more specifically BYD, they have the ability to produce extremely competitive, in many ways superior cars, and they do so at an extremely cheap price because BYD produces their own batteries, a cost that for many other companies like Ford, GM, and Tesla is an extremely costly part of manufacturing an EV. So you have a car like the BYD Yon Plus, which some may argue is not as sharp as anything in the Tesla lineup, but it is cheaper than any single new car you can buy in 2025 in the United States. But the question really isn't, is this car better than a Tesla? Because the truth is, this car isn't even in the same price range as the Model 3. And this car is actually cheaper than the cheapest new car in the United States, which is the Nissan Versa. And so the real question is the BYD Yon Plus, is that better than the Nissan Versa? And I think the answer is a clear yes. The bottom line is US automakers don't want Chinese automakers to enter the United States whenever they can produce a better car at an even better price. This is especially true when A, the US has been unable to produce EVs effectively. At least this definitely applies to the major gas automakers that are transitioning to EVs. And B, the US has successfully marked up nearly every single car in the American market, making cars more expensive than ever. American automakers have made a killing over the last few years as they killed off their cheapest lower margin vehicles and as they've doubled down on their more expensive higher margin ones. And so these same automakers certainly don't want a Chinese automaker to come in selling a cheaper product, forcing these automakers to evolve, reevaluate their pricing, or just reevaluate their strategy altogether. I mean, Elon Musk himself was quoted in saying last year that Chinese EV firms would demolish rivals without trade barriers. It's just a real shame that this ban on Chinese automakers is a reality, because the fact is, the person who is getting harmed from this is you and I. As I mentioned throughout this video, the American car market is extremely expensive, and consumers really want to find a cheaper, high-quality car. And at a time where there is virtually no other automaker offering that, BYD could come in and offer a product that consumers really need. And so by the US government signing off on this type of ban, they are really hurting the same people that vote for them, the same people that pay taxes, and the same people that support this economy entirely. And ultimately, the US government is doing this to protect these American companies that also screwed us by price increases over the last few years. It is just extremely frustrating and disappointing, and dare I say, anti-American. But don't get it twisted, Chinese automakers are actually not banned for every American, just the normal, unimportant ones. Because in a 2024 interview with Ford CEO Jim Farley, he admitted that he had actually been daily driving a Chinese automaker to test it out.
Exactly what you said. It's like everyone's talking about the Apple car, but the Xiaomi car,
which now exists and is on the road.
Which now exists.
Tens of thousands.
And it's fantastic. They sell
Right.
10,000, 20,000 a month. They're sold out for 6 months.
Wow.
You know, that is an industry juggernaut and a
Yes.
consumer brand that is much stronger than car companies. I don't like talking about the competition so much, but I drive the
No.
Xiaomi. We flew one from Shanghai to Chicago, and I've been driving it for 6 months now, and I don't want to give it up.
Like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.